Hello, and welcome to the 186th episode of Gaming Talk. On this episode, I'm going to be discussing and giving my thoughts on the Resident Evil 4 Remake. Let's get into it. I have to say that if I could pick a single word to describe this game, it would be intense. This game is super intense from start to finish, and I'm not saying that as a bad thing, but I'm also not saying that as a good thing either. Now, because I feel like I'm going to get comments about this, I just want to say that no. I have never played the original Resident Evil 4, so any comments about how things were in the original doesn't matter to me because I've never played it and I don't have that baseline. Let me start with the good things. The first and probably most obvious thing is that the RE4 remake looks really good graphically. It's no surprise given that both the remakes of RE2 and RE3 look good as well as RE7 and 8 do. I also really enjoyed the music and the sound effects in the game. I mean, in those moments that the RE4 remake chooses to be a survival horror game, the music and sound effects really add to that atmosphere extremely well. But again, that's when it chooses to be a survival horror game. I personally found those added DLC weapons to be very helpful in the early game, especially with how the beginning of this game goes. Sure, it's mostly relying on the handgun because I didn't have shotgun ammo to use in the skull thing. But that's fine because the handgun came in handy. Now, it's not like they were useless as I progressed through the game, but I eventually did get better weapons and eventually no longer needed those DLC weapons. And boy, did they sell for a lot, which was really nice. Something I personally enjoyed as I was playing is stuff that felt very similar to RE8. I'm sure it was not intentional, but I did notice several things that were similar as I was playing. This is probably going to sound odd, but something I like is that the player inventory is represented by a case that all of your stuff is stored in that you can upgrade, and the amount of space as you progress through the game. I say this because I always found it a little odd in the remakes of RE2 and 3 that your inventory was just like grids in a black void that you upgraded by acquiring hip pouches. I don't know, the case just makes more sense and feels a little more realistic to me. The progression of the enemy types is done really well. At first you deal with just basic villagers, then you get introduced to slightly harder ones with enemies like the brutes and chainsaw guys. Eventually you get ranged variants with flaming crossbows and rocket launchers. Even the ones that have the mutation happen, they go from like a thing that swipes at you to a thing that could just like munch your head off to a thing that can munch your head off but now can also spit stuff at you. The bugs don't see that much variation, but at least they can't kill you in one hit, unlike the invisible enemies in Resident Evil Revelations 2. Even the tougher enemies have variations, like there's the basic regenerator, and then there's the spiky ones. There's basic giant and armored giant. It's honestly really a nice kind of progression of enemies as you go through the game. There are a few things that I'm very much neutral on, and the first of those is the shooting range. This is because I just did not bother with the shooting range, so I have no opinion on it because of that. The other thing is just the overall tone of the game. There are some moments that it feels very survivor horror, and some moments that it feels very military shooter, especially once you get to the island. I don't think it's bad. I don't think it's good. So that's why I put it in neutral, because I don't really know how I feel about it. Now it's time to get into the things about the RE4 remake that I didn't really like. I'm going to start small with the fact that I honestly found the merchant to be very annoying. I'm sure that's going to be controversial, hot take, but I just felt that he says the most random stuff that was not funny or helpful or anything. He'd just randomly tell me at points to hurry up, like, please, just shut up, man. The guy isn't funny to me, and I really don't get what other people see that's so great about the merchant, because I think he's super annoying, and I would rather he just didn't talk while I'm trying to make decisions. I found myself constantly running very low on ammo. I've never had that issue in any other Resident Evil game that I've played. It boggles my mind in areas like the island, where the tone of the game is very military shooter. Why not take the opportunity to load me up on ammo? Now, I never completely ran out of ammo for all my weapons, but I came close several times. Now, before I say this part, I want to preface that I am not a puzzle person, not in games, not in real life either. Keep in mind this as I tell you that I found several of the puzzles to be very difficult. I'm pretty sure the one I spent the most time on is that orb marble puzzle in the beginning of the game. I probably spent a better of 10 minutes or more rotating that stupid thing in every possible direction before finally making the stupid symbol, and yes, that was with consulting at least 3 YouTube videos on how to solve it. Again, it's just me, but I found the puzzles way more difficult than they needed to be in this game. There's something about the intensity of the game that doesn't sit well with me. This game is intense from start to finish, as I've said. For example, right from the beginning of the game, the first encounter with basic enemies is an overwhelming amount of them when the player only has their basic handgun with limited ammo. Sure, the enemies do drop ammo and you do get the opportunity to melee them if you can land a headshot, but you have to deal with this overwhelming amount of enemies until a cutscene is triggered. I feel like this would have made more sense to have the player face like 2 to 4 of them before coming to the part where there's just an overwhelming amount of them. Add to that, this game breaks what I consider to be the cardinal sin of game design and have enemies spawn in behind the player. And honestly, that's just really cheap and frustrating. Like, there are some games out there where the AI is programmed so well that they could skillfully maneuver their way behind the player if the player is not paying attention, like the first Fear game. This, however, is not the case with RE4 Remake. This is just spawning enemies in behind the player, and this happened more times than I would have liked it to. There's times where I'm backing up and shooting, and the next thing I know, there's 2 or 3 enemies behind me. How did they get there? But things with enemies only get more intense, which is going to be my next point. I found the boss fights to be very unfair most of the time. I know that some of them, like the Krauser fight, is supposed to be unfair, but it makes it feel like these fights are difficult for the sake of being difficult and not providing an actual meaningful challenge to the player. A lot of the boss fights, the bosses just have attacks that you either can't avoid or they'll give you like half a second to press the E to evade key. And for me, that's not enough time to actually hit the key, so I'm stuck taking that damage. Plus, a lot of the boss fights felt like a battle of attrition. You know, I'm taking damage, I'm doing damage, and then a cutscene triggers where they die. This makes it feel less like a skill thing to defeating these bosses and more like again, battle of attrition. I just have to survive long enough and do enough damage to the boss and heal through enough damage for the death cutscene to trigger. Of course, the absolutely most frustrating and annoying thing to me about the RE4 remake is Ashley. I'm sure that what I'm going to say about her has been said in every other review about this game, but I'm going to say it anyway. She is the most useless waste of a human being in any video game ever, and I mean that. Unless you were telling her to hide in a locker, she does not listen at all. I had her set to following me tight. 98% of the time she was with me, yet we'd managed to get separated. There's times where, I'm trying to run, to turn around to shoot enemies, and I turn around and who do I accidentally almost shoot? Her, because she doesn't know how to get the hell out of the way. Don't even get me started on the catapult area where I had to save her ass more times than I cared to admit because she'd go down if a speck of dust got on her. I was relieved, honestly, for sections when she was not there, and I got to the point where I didn't even want to save her. I had to because it's part of the game, but there were so many times where I'm like, look, bad guys, if you want to take her, just feed her, water her. I'm done with her. There's also a section where you have to play as her to save Leon, and I learned very quickly that Ashley can die in one hit from the enemy. You're telling me that Leon is the only one of the characters in this game that can have a health bar? They couldn't have given Ashley a health bar in this section that you are forced to play as her? Anyway, she constantly gets in the way when you're trying to deal with enemies, and as I said, she's useless. She doesn't have any weapons or anything that she can defend herself with. Nothing, which is stupid. In Resident Evil Revelations 2, yeah, Moira didn't like guns, but she had a flashlight that could stun enemies and a crowbar that she could smack enemies with. She has a purpose. She has the ability to defend herself, which is very much unlike Ashley, who just cowers in fear the entire time she was with you and provides absolutely nothing meaningful. One minor thing is that I know there are some people that didn't like the change to Ashley's outfit from the original, because in the original, you can point the camera up between her legs, but oh no, you can't do that anymore. I'll be honest, I don't know why you would want to or when you would have the time to if you're actually playing the game, because the game is really intense and you don't really have time to stop and do that. I hate to say it, but she doesn't act like an adult. She acts like more of a whiny teenager, so it would be hard for me to see her as an adult, even though I know her canon age is 20 in the game. Either way, I'm perfectly fine with the change in outfit, and I am way perfectly fine with the change of dialogue at the end of the game, where in the original she basically asks Leon to meet her in the bedroom. Yeah, I'm glad they took that one out personally, because that's kind of weird to me. Overall, I'm kind of torn on this one. It felt like 50% of the game I was enjoying myself, and the other 50% of the time I was stressed, panicked, and just not having fun playing this game. The Resident Evil 4 Remake is a good game that I did enjoy some of the time, but sometimes I didn't. But I do recommend playing it. And that's going to do it for this episode, so if you like this kind of content, feel free to subscribe. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.